And they wanted to test how this type of analysis would work 0 on every possible key. So instead of getting actual audio for 586,000 keys, they just simulated where the clicks would be in those audio recordings. Spiky was like a best-case analysis for an attacker. So if he manages to get all the click information precisely, then this is how the result will be. Using the time between each click and some clever geometry, the researchers attempted to figure out the shape of each key. About 12% of the locations posed what we consider to be a high or severe risk of health impairments to fish, wildlife, or humans if they consumed organisms from those locations. You can begin to build models that are predictive of how much mercury might be in a system and then apply that model to locations where you haven't sampled dragonflies. And that can inform future management actions, either to address the factors that are promoting the mercury production or simply to inform agencies that may want to evaluate whether or not fish consumption advisories are warranted. So how was this reflected in the design? Well, Harrison decided to create pedestrian access to the building and to make use of the presence of water on the site. As people approach the entrance, they therefore have to cross over a bridge. He wanted to give people a feeling of suspense as they see the building first from a distance, and then close up, and the initial impression he wanted to create from the building as a whole was that of a box. Political activities and thinkers across a broad array of ideologies, from libertarians to social liberals to the hard left, are intrigued, or even keen. The Cato Institute, an American think tank which spends much of its time calling for a smaller state, published a sympathetic analysis of the policy in 2015. It feels that, though it might prefer a world with no government redistribution, a basic income is the simplest. In Mexico and Brazil, they have developed conditional cash transfer programs. They are what they say on the tin. Cash is given to women of low income, but there are conditions. Children have to be taken to nutrition and health clinics, older children have to remain in school. In Brazil, the result has been great reductions in poverty and inequality, improvements in school attendance, especially of girls, and health improvements. Questions have been raised as to whether the conditionality is needed. The notion that you could create anything at all has major implications for our health. It means that we'll eventually be able to replicate anything. This would have a phenomenal effect on our society. In time could even lead to the eradication of famine through the introduction of machines that produce food to feed the hungry. All of us who write about the stuff are even more energetically than usual giving one of those kinds of like waving the arms and saying, hey, don't do this, don't use this is not ready for public consumption, do this separate partition or an or old iPhone or whatever you want to do because it is messy. But Duffield and colleagues now collect data on the brown-throated sloth in the Atlantic forest. Duffield says the sloths can stay inside, or even in the same tree for nearly 24 hours. The animal are at rest anywhere from 75 to 90% of the time. But they're coping with a damaged ecosystem. The suggestion is 98% of that forest has been depleted, there's a lot of human disturbance, there's a lot of roads cutting through these areas in the forest. And it means the population and fauna and flora is depleted. Researchers then recorded videos of hours flies trying to get to the horses. Let me look in detail of what these separate strips were doing to horseflies as they were flying coming into land. We found that horseflies are flying much faster. They come to land with striped patterns than they were when we were landing on gray or black. Faster and more erratically, the flies made successful landings much less frequently on the horses in stripes than on the solids, but there's more. Living in Antarctic hasn't always been so comfortable. Snow build-ups caused enormous problems for 4 previous stations on the same site, which were buried and finally crushed by the 8. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but these buildings became a huge challenge to architects who finally came up with a remarkable solution. The buildings are placed on platforms which can be raised above the changing snow level on legs which are extendable.